Hello and welcome to this webinar on the latest functionality contained within STRUMIS Evolution version 10.4. In this webinar, we're going to be taking a look at enhancements to the contract or bill of material revisions. And if any of you have any questions throughout the course of this webinar, please post those in the chat window to be reviewed during a question and answer session at the end. So to begin with, let's take a look at the model that we're going to be utilising throughout the course of this revisions process. To begin with, we already have in place this imported model, and as we can see, there are a series of columns and beams arranged in a framework. Throughout the course of this video, what we're going to do is make a series of changes to this model and show what happens throughout the course of its revision. So we'll see things like material changes, we'll see location changes, and we'll see some length variables throughout the course of our revisions process. So let's start off by taking a look at our detailed listing. So you can see here the primary import has already been completed. It's brought in my drawings with associated marks and mark item connections, and you can see I've highlighted up the GUID column to the right hand side, which I can see if I turn on my individual mark and mark item instances, and this column is going to be useful to us a little bit later on when we start looking at revisions to this contract, so that we can see what precisely has changed for each of our marks and mark items during that process. As you can see, this is also in lotting. And you can see I've got the marks in the lotted state currently. Now, thanks to our new functionality, we can see now that the document status is set for issue for approval, as during the primary import we brought in our documents for each of these as well, and they have been issued off on transmittals and are currently pending approval. So you can see there my document approval date is not yet populated as a result of that. So at the moment I'm not going to be pushing these forward through to the rest of the system until that's come back for approval. We also have up here two new options for displaying individual mark instances and displaying cancelled marks instances. So the cancelled mark instances is going to become useful to us a little bit later on as well when we start looking at black flagging throughout the revisions process. If I turn on my individual mark instances, we can also see here that the GUID column is currently in use as well here. So we'll be able to take a look at the GUIDs in both the detailed listing and the lotting stage as well. And that's become possible thanks to our new function for displaying individual mark instances at this stage of the contract. So if I go to Contract BIM Review up here, and I go to my Views tab, if I just load up my contract mark document management drawing status, you can see here that everything is set for issue for approval. So again, I'm going to be utilizing this view throughout the course of this webinar to explore the stages of the drawing approval throughout the course of handling my revisions. So let's go ahead and close everything down. And let's take a look in our contracts management module and look at our contract management options. So if I go down towards the bottom of this grid, at the very bottom I should find my revision settings. Now, we've made some significant changes to the way that revisions will be handled through STRUMIS, and this may become apparent by seeing here, look, I have allow all revisions opened up on the mark item quantity decrease, the mark quantity decrease, and non-material changes. Now, material changes I've set for allow revisions in production, specifically to keep that restriction in place. Previously I may have had restrictions in other areas, but I've opened these up for this particular webinar to show some of the functions that we now have available. So the variable options affect the way in which we handle the revisions process through STRUMIS, and depending on the options we select, it would depend if we're looking to automate the revisions process so that we can utilize our new functionality. That's going to include cancelling marks and mark items with automated black flag functions. Previously, we would obviously have to place these items on hold to be removed manually, and that's going to become apparent when we start to look at the further imports and the revisions options we have on the detailed listing import wizard. So within the scope of the new functionality, decreases and non-material changes can be cancelled at any time. And using this, it means we can reclaim the material for inventory, or we can import a new version of the part, leaving the old one orphaned so it can just sit in the system. And of course, we can also reclaim it or scrap the material at any time. In this example, this isn't necessarily going to be applicable to our primary or secondary imports as they're just lotted at the moment. However, later in the webinar, we'll look at material changes within this scenario. Just like to point out here as well, whilst I'm in this screen, for material changes, we're going to leave those slightly restricted as it's going to impact areas we've utilised the material in the contract, such as nesting. So if the material was simply issued to production, that would be okay. However, a nest would align the parts with a specific material section type, and that's going to compromise the integrity of my nest, which is going to cause me inevitably issues later on in the job when I start to look at how I'm going to utilise my materials. Okay, so let's move on and take a look at our next import. So this is the model that we're going to be working with in our next round, in our secondary import. And we can see here that this particular beam has now been moved down, which means that the holes have now also moved along the columns that are holding it up. So previously, we had these marked as C2s. They are now going to become C4s and be remarked because of that hole location change. So when we're expecting to see during the import process is that we've got this decrease in quantity of C2s, and we're now going to have two C4s put in its place. So we're expecting to see two of the C2s go to a black flag because they were cancelled, and as I say, a quantity of two C4s being brought in to replace them. Of course, we'll also see the new drawings, the revised C2s now becoming C4s. They're also going to get imported as well. So let's go ahead and jump back into STRUMIS, and let's go to our wizards. Go to import detailed listing and progress our way through the detailed listing import wizard. So if I go next, you can see it's already filtered for my contract. I can go next again. Select my chosen CAD interface to import the model. Select my new revised file. And go next. So we can see here that the cross-referencing has already been done. I've already identified the parts in the model with the material library in STRUMIS, so it now knows what we've got. We can see it's phased and set to lot 0. So if I go next, we're now going to load up the revisions screen. So as expected, we can see here on new mark items, we've got 4. Now if I go into there and have a look, we can see they're all marked C4. So this is the column and plate for the two new C4s that we've got in. And on the changed mark items, we've got those C2s. Now if we look at the revision detail, we can see, I'll expand that out a little bit more. We've got the mark quantity decrease in place against that couple of C2s that we had there. So that's indicating a reduction against those C2s. And again, referring back to my contract options for revisions, I had allowable revisions on. As I say, these are only in lotting, so they're not going to be restricted in any way, shape or form. We haven't utilized those parts in any way through the rest of the system, so we should be fine on the revision. There should be no need for any unnesting or anything like that. So if I then go down to my actions and go to BIM review, so that's going to open up BIM review for me, and it's going to show me those C2s highlighted up in the model as we expected from our example at the beginning. If I zoom out just a little bit just to get a better look at the model. So down here we've got our C4s. So if I was to close that down, go to my new mark items, I could repeat the same process. BIM review, highlight mark items. And we can see there our new C4s that have been brought through, highlighted again in the grid view at the bottom. So that highlights the change in the model. We also have the option at this point to run our revisions report. So if I was to run that report at this time, it would give me a report that indicates all the changes that are due to occur on this contract, at which point I could take this and email it for notification. That's going to allow me then to potentially, if I would like to, close down this particular import and send additional transmittals to verify this. Of course, I can then come back in, rerun the import and conclude it when I've got approval on these changes. So if I then go on to the next screen, I need to make sure I've got my link to doc management ticked so that I can bring in the new drawings for those C4s and make the relative revisions. And I'd like to draw your attention down here to the new option for cancel, removed, mark and mark items. Now, this is referencing back to the contract settings I was talking about a little bit earlier on. If we're looking to automate the black flag process, unlike the previous way that we had to do this, where we would conclude it with things on hold and then have to manually cancel and black flag the parts that we didn't want to occur in the detailed listing anymore, we can now tick that box and that will do it for us. Of course, that's applicable only if we are looking to reduce down the instances of mark and mark items to 0. So there's a little reminder of that just down below as well. I'm going to utilize that function for this, and I'm going to go ahead and hit finish. And that's going to bring up my document import screen. So as I had ticked link to doc management at the back enabled, I now have my document import wizard loaded up. I'm just going to full screen that. And I'm going to utilize my import new documents and revise existing, as I want to make changes to those that are in place and bring in the new stuff. So it'll be the C4 drawings that we'll need to incorporate into this. So if I go next and take a look at the documents, so we can see in the documents to highlight up the changes that we've now made. We've now got a revision file brought through to replace the changes that we've made to the likes of our C2, where the whole centers have moved, and that's resulted in new CAM data being generated as well. And we can see that the new C4 CAD drawings have also been brought through as well. Now the next stage I'm going to go through is to highlight all of those and use the batch update to set them all up to issue for approval. So on my document status, I'm going to set them up for issue for approval, and that way when I bring these through into my contract, I know that I've then got to generate some transmittals for these to validate with the client that the changes are adequate. So I'm going to go next. I'm going to tick the box for automatically setting milestones so I can put my dates in place, and I'm going to hit finish. So with that import now concluded, we can see the detailed listing is open, and if we take a look at the marks in the top quarter of the screen here, we can see that we've got this new icon here, this partial black flag. Now that's there to indicate that we've now had a quantity reduction of the C2s, as we now have our new C4 in play there with a quantity of 2 there. So if I was to double click on that and go to my revisions history, you can see there I've now had a quantity change in the revisions history from 4 down to 2 within the C2s, and you can see there who it's been revised by and when that occurred. Now, if I was to do the same thing on the C4s and go to the revisions history, we can see the changes that have been made from the C2 to the C4. So it records in here as well to say that this is new as a result of that modification from the C2 to the C4. Now, if I was to go back to my production lotting and open up Lotted, if we draw our attention to the transmittals for documents, we can see here that we've got now no transmittal listed against the C2s, despite the fact that they were on the initial transmittal. This is obviously shown here by this revision A in the document revisions column. Now, what's happened is, as a point of the revision, it's now left this on a new pending transmittal so that we can then send that off to verify the change. So if I go down to document management and go to document pending transmittals, we can see here the C2 transmittal. To open that up, I could then follow that through and push this through to create a new transmittal to verify the C2 change. However, the way I'm going to handle that is I'm going to put the C2 and the C4 onto a new transmittal. So I'm looking for approval against the C4, and I'm including the C2 into it as a point of reference to show the variables through the change process. So I'm just going to go to right click, go to add documents to transmittal, add drawings, and I'm going to put the mark drawings on that. So I'm going to add my distribution list in. Specify sent by. And for a more in-depth look at the functionality that we're utilizing at this time, you can refer across to our other webinar on the document control processes through STRUMIS 10.4. So I'm just creating my information surrounding my transmittal. So I'm going to go next, verify my documents by validating them, show me the available file space that is taken up, go next, and if I go here to edit email transmittal, it's going to allow me to come into the email prior to sending off the transmittal to do things like publish my signature onto this correspondence, or maybe modify the contents contained within it. So I can do that and then go ahead and hit send to send that email off for transmittal verification and approval. So as we can see now, they're now on this new transmittal. And what I'm also going to do is just sort for my, I'll put a filter on for my first transmittal. I'm just going to grab all of those, and I'm going to take a look at that transmittal and apply a response to it to indicate that we've had an approval response come back through. So I'm just going to say it's come in to myself, and I'm just going to put an approved message in there. That'll do. And at this point, I may want to go into my documents. And now that all my documents except C2 have been approved, I'm going to update the document status to approved, which is going to put me in a position where I can now utilize new functionality in naming released lots. in order for us to push our approved marks and their relative mark items off into production. Before we do that, let's take a quick look at our contract bin review model. That's going to help us identify the marks at the right document stage. So let's take a look here at contract mark document management drawing statuses. That's going to show me those that are issued for approval and those that are approved. So you can see that my C2s have been placed back on with my new C4s to show the relative changes that have occurred. And you can see everything else is set for approval. So that's all going to get released into production. Before we do that and we go through that process of using the new release tool, I'd just like to draw our attention up here to our display individual mark instances. Now this is new to 10.4. And that's going to do things like expose our GUIDs for us in instance mode of the marks. It's also going to allow us to open up this display cancelled mark instances. So another way in which we can see as we progress our job through the system where we have got any black flag or cancelled items. We can see there I've now got 2 lines in not lotted. So if I look at that, that's those 2 cancelled C2s that have occurred as a result of our revision. And we saw that in the detailed listing a little bit earlier on. And if I go to lotted, I can see there's my 2 instances of C2 that have remained and my C4s that obviously new as a result of that import. So I'm going to clear these functions out. I'm just going to do a quick filter for my approved document status. I'm going to grab all of these and we're going to go through the release process utilizing release name, which again is new to 10.4 and is applicable at this stage because I have the option set in contracts management options to use this tool. So if I go to released and go to the ellipsis button, I can specify a release name for this. I'm going to call this phase 2 lot 0 release 1. So that's now created it in the drop-down menu for me. I can hit OK. And that's now going to push that to released. And we can see here release name is populated within the grids along with the release date. And of course, if I was to look back, you can see there is my C2 and my C4 quantities that have been left behind while they are sat at issued for approval. So with my approved parts set, ready and released, I'm now going to go to generate contract work orders. I'm going to issue my mark items, and before we do that, just a quick look there to see release name and date is visible in this grid. If I grab all those, right click, issue to production selection. I'm going to follow the generate work order wizards through. I'm going to include my CAM processing and allow my templates to pick by least time. So that's now generated me valid templates. So I'm going to go next and push these on in prefabrication. You can see there I've got some in cutting, some in drilling holes. There's timings visible for those mark items. So if I finish that off, that's then going to push those into production. And I'm going to do the same thing with my marks, where I'm going to issue those into production as well. And again, release name and date visible in this grid as well. I'll go right click, issue to production selection, and again push those on through my templates. I've got all valid templates, that's good. I'm going to then go next. You can see my timings are now being published, and I go finish. So that's now pushed my mark items and my marks into production. So in production control, I can see under mark item work orders, I can see everything's in prefabrication, so it's all at the cutting stage at the moment. So I haven't processed any of these mark items yet. None of them have got material. We're not at the nesting stage just yet, but before we get to that stage, we're going to process our third revision. and we'll do nesting after the third to push on to the fourth. So I'm now going to take a quick look there and just check my mark work orders are visible too. And again, we can see our release name and release date are visible in production control as well. You may have also noticed we've also got up here display individual mark and mark item instances tick box now available here, and this will become very useful to us a little bit later on once we've processed our next import, displaying cancelled mark and mark item instances. So again, we can see these as a toggleable option within production control as well. So I'm going to put those back. And let's take a look at our third import. So on our next import, on our third in this process, we're going to look at a section size change on mark B4. So that's going to be a 406 140 46 UB to a 406 140 39 UB. So within this process, what we're anticipating seeing is that B3 will be remarked to B4, resulting in a quantity reduction on the B3. So we're expecting in the revision screen on the import to see on the removed mark items a B3 and on a new a B4. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that's going to look like by processing this import. So let's go ahead and process our third file import. So we're going to go back up to Wizards and back to import our detailed listing. We're going to go next, following the wizard through. We've already got our contract pre-selected as expected. I can go next, choose my interface that I was using before, select my new third revision model, and go next. So that's going to load the file into the wizard for me, and I can see here that all my cross-referencing is already done. It's already recognized that from the item libraries references, so I don't need to do any work on this screen. I've got nothing in invalid marks and nothing in invalid dimensions either, so that's good for me to progress forward. So I'm going to go next. And this brings us to the revision screen, where we can see, if I go to my changed mark items and look to the revisions details, as expected, there has been a change to the drawings. That's because now that we've changed the section size, this is now going to mean that the drawings from before are no longer valid. So we've got that revision, they're attached to the BSWX. So it's detected that change, and it's also detected the quantity decrease of the B3s. So we see there mark B3, the associated mark items are now being reduced down. And if I go to new mark item, I should see the B4s, the associated mark items for B4 connected on there as well. And again, by looking at the revisions details, we can see that it's creating these B4s in the answer to reducing down the B3s. So we can see there on the mark item status that it's set for in production. So it's detecting the state that the contract is already in and where those B3s already are in the system. And of course, I can see that both on the grid, and if I was to go to actions and view mark status, I could expand this down to see where I've got certain parts on which workstation and how many at what stage in production from this screen as well. So with that in mind, let's go to the next screen. And in here, I'm going to leave my removed items down here alone. I'm going to leave it as ignore all removed. At the moment, we're not reducing anything down to 0, so cancel removed mark or mark items isn't going to be applicable. So I'm going to make sure I've got my link to .management connected, and I'm going to go finish. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and import our new revised documentation as well. So I'm going to choose my storage path to place that in again, make sure that's put in place, and I'm going to go next. And we can see here that we've got our B3 modifications in place. If I was to just open that up a little bit, we can see here that our current revision for our model is set to A. We've got a new revision in there. Obviously, there's a third one in there, so it's Rev B. We've got our revisions in for the connected information surrounding B3, including new CAM data for mark item M6. And down here, we've got the new B4 data coming in with the relative CAM data for the associated mark items and the CAD drawings for those as well. So again, I'm just going to grab all of those and go to batch update and set the document status for all of those as issue for approval as well. Now that's going to be a step that we're going to see now mirrored out in lotting when I conclude this, making sure I'm using my milestones to get my dates in place. So if we go back to lotting and we go to the released tab, we can see our B3 at the top up here is now set for issued for approval as per the conclusion of the document import process we've just gone through, setting the document status up. And we can also see that in the transmittals, it's no longer associated with a transmittal as per the workflow we saw before. We can also see here that it's associated as a revision A. So if I go ahead and turn on individual mark instances and then display my cancelled mark instances, I can see the black flag instance of that B3 at the top up there, which is what's attributed this scenario to occur. If I go back to lotted and have a look in there, we can see our B4 instance, as it's a new item, has gone into lotted. It hasn't yet gone through the process of approval in preparation to go to released, therefore making it available in production. So that would need to go off on a transmittal to seek approval to do that. So if I then go over to generate contract work orders, I can then see if I go to my mark items issued, I've got the partial black flag over my B3s. We can see that there. And if I turn on my individual mark item instances and turn on display cancelled, I can see the black flag instances of the mark items that are in play against the B3s that have now been set to cancelled. And if I go to the marks issued, I can see that cancelled B3 there. So that's been black flagged, as I said before, so that we've got the B4 coming into effect in replacement to that B3 mark. Again, if I go to production control, again I'm in mark work orders here, we can see the partial. If I hover over it, it tells me cancelled marks. Some of the mark instances in this work order have been cancelled. So if I go to display individual mark item instances, and again go to display cancelled, I can see there's my black flagged instance. Now, if I go to my mark item work orders, we can also see these filters in here as well. If I just go to cutting so I can see all of my processes, and if I scroll down a little bit, those two there are the mark items in work orders that are now cancelled. As I said before, in preparation of replacing that for the B4 mark. So the next step will be for us to take a look at our final import. So this is the final model that we're going to be importing. Now, in the course of the contract, since we finished off the import number 3, I've subsequently nested and received the material for the job. So at the point we're at now, we've added a further complication to the revisions process by incorporating nesting into it as well. So we're going to see how the import revisions process reacts to nested material. So in this change, we've got our highlighted up columns in place there. We can see that we have a C3 and now a C5 in the middle as well. So what we're doing here is C3 is having a length change and is going to be longer, and C5 is being shortened. Given the modifications that we've got going on in this model, we're expecting to see a C3 reduction and C5 marks being added in. Now, the complication that we've put in place with the nesting now means that we're going to have to handle the variables in the cut plans. So the C5, because it's a shorter length, it could remain on the cut plans. Obviously, we now have more material in our offcut. However, with the other C3 that's being made longer, that might now nullify my cut plan. So I'm anticipating that the nesting wizard will pop up at the end and ask me to unnest that C3. Basically, we're looking at a situation where we want to pull that back into inventory so that we can utilize that material for another part, perhaps. So before we move on, let's look at our model one last time. Just to get a feel for the state of the job. As I mentioned, everything is already covered, so my material has all been nested up and there has been material receipted for each of the components within the model. I can see that in the background. I've got purchase orders lit up on my contract ribbon, and I can see that I've got item inventory, so it shows that there's been material receipted for the job. And if I go down and take a look at the production statuses, I can see my mark items are all sat in cutting, so nothing has been cut as of yet. So we've got the material, it's just not been processed. And if I go to my marks by production process, I can see they're at the start of their process as well. They're at fit up, so the work order hasn't progressed any further for any of my components. So with that in mind, let's go back up to our wizards, import detailed listing, and let's run our next file through. So we're going to go next. We can see there that we have our contract already pre-selected. I'm going to pick my interface and choose my new revised file. So import 4. Let's go next. You can see here, once again, my cross-referencing has already been completed. I've got nothing to be done on this screen. I can go next. And in the revision screen, we can see that we've got changed mark items and new mark items. So as expected, we can see here in the revision details that we've got a mark item length change on a C3, which has incurred a drawing revision, and we've got a quantity decrease on the C3s. We can also see that that's associated for both the column and its plate. So if I have a look in new mark items, we should have a new column and plate marked as in C5. So we can see this is now creating these C5s in response to the change and the reduction of the C3s. So I can also go into, if I highlight up that M4, go to actions and view mark status. If I just expand this out a little bit, look at the M4s, we can see that it's covered in inventory, and we can see here the purchase order that it's on, and if I click on the hyperlink, it'll open me up the purchase order in the background. So I could go off and take a look at that in a minute as well. So we can see that it's set to closed, and at the bottom down here I can see total order and total received. I've definitely receipted that material in. So if I then go next, we're now looking at the rollback stage for unnesting the material that we have on our nests that are already committed. So we can see here that it's been receipted, but nothing has been cut. And same here up on the plates, it's been received, but nothing cut as of yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have both of those highlighted and go to Unnest Undo. And it's at this stage we can then decide what we're going to do with the material that's left over as a result of us pulling those parts from those cut plans. So we've got a choice. We can either scrap all the cut material, so if the parts aren't reusable for either this or future contracts, or alternatively, we could save the cut material. Now, if it has physically been cut, then that means we'll have a part left over, a length of material that's the size of the part that we intended to be used for. It might be that it's something that we can use again in the future, in which case we can return those individually into our inventory. Alternatively, if we're unnesting, say, the entire cut plan, it might be that we want to return everything back as one bar. Now, in this scenario, I haven't got anything cut, so these options aren't really applicable at this time. I'm just going to leave it as the default under scrap all cut material, and I'm going to go next. And I need to make sure that I have my link to doc management ticked, which I do, so I can bring in my new revised drawings. And I'm not going to make any changes to my revisions steps. It should all be set up as I need it. So I'm going to hit finish. And at this stage, we're going to now conclude this import with our final round of revised drawings. So we're going to make sure we're using our BIM review importer, make sure I've got the correct model in place. That should be auto-filled anyway through the wizard. And I'm running it against contract 160 and my file storage path is good. So I'm going to make sure again I'm using import new documents and revise existing. I'm going to go next. And we can see that we've got now our revisions occurring on our model. Let's change that to a Rev C. And we can see that we've got the new revisions occurring on C3s and the C5s are new, so we shouldn't be getting any revisions on those at all. That's correct. Okay, so as we did before, I'm just going to grab those and batch update the document status to issue for approval. And I'm going to go next and ticking my milestones, finish that document import. So now that we've done that final import in lotting, we should see under lotted our C5. It's a new item, so as I said before, it goes straight into lotted. Under released, if we turn on our instances, we should see that C3 has now been, or a instance of C3 has been black flagged, which is spot on. And if I was to go over to production control, we should see, if we switch on our individual mark item instances and our cancelled with a quick filter from C3, we can see our cancelled C3s for our mark items F1 and M4, and our remaining F1 and M4 instances are still in place. So just to finish off the process, if we then go and take another look at the model and we go to our views, if we take a look at the material that's covered, we can see that we've got everything covered except the items that we've got still sat in lotting awaiting approval due to a change. So that's including our new C5 that we just looked at there on that import that you can see is clearly longer. Thank you for participating in this 10.4 webinar. For those of you who had questions posted in the chat window,
We're now going to do a quick Q&A session with Chris Eaton.